Timothy Buss. He is in prison serving a life sentence for kidnapping, essaying, and brutally murdering a 10-year-old boy, a crime he committed just 2 years after being paroled for a different child murder he perpetrated as a teenager. In May 1981, Timothy Buss was 13 years old and living in Illinois when he committed his first murder. He abducted, essayed, and bludgeoned the 5-year-old girl to death. After committing the murders, he pretended to help searchers and was actually the person who discovered her body in a shallow pit. The victim was Tarasu Huffman. Tried as an adult under Illinois law, Buss was convicted of first-degree murder in 1981 and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Due to the state's day-for-day good behavior sentencing laws at the time, Buss served exactly half of his sentence, and he was paroled in August 1993 after 12 and a half years of incarceration. On August 7, 1995, only 2 years after his release, then 27-year-old Buss struck again. A 10-year-old boy disappeared while playing near a boat launch in Aroma Park, Illinois. Following an intense 8-day search by hundreds of volunteers and law enforcement officers, the boy's body was discovered buried in a shallow grave. An autopsy revealed he had been essayed, mutilated, and stabbed more than 40 times. Physical evidence, including soil on Buss's boots that matched the gravesite, quickly tied him to the abduction. 10-year-old Christopher Meyer was visiting his mother for the summer. Buss was charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated unlawful restraint. During the 1996 trial, his defense team attempted to mitigate his actions by presenting testimony from psychologists who argued Buss suffered from abnormal brain functions and severe childhood trauma stemming from early maternal rejection. The jury rejected the defense and convicted Buss on all counts. On July 5, 1996, the jury voted to sentence Buss to death by lethal injection. This guy spent years on Illinois death row. However, in January 2003, outgoing Illinois Governor George Ryan famously commuted the death sentences of all 167 inmates on the state's death row to life imprisonment due to concerns over the state's capital punishment system. Consequently, Buss's sentence was converted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated in a maximum security state facility in Illinois. The public outrage surrounding Christopher Meyer's murder, specifically the fact that a convicted child killer had been released back into the community without anyone's knowledge, served as the direct catalyst for Illinois to pass child murderer notification laws. These laws legally mandate that law enforcement must formally notify residents whenever a convicted child murderer or sex offender moves into their neighborhood. Alyssa Bustamante. She is in prison for executing a premeditated thrill killing of her 9-year-old neighbor, a crime she committed because she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Alyssa was just 15 years old at the time of the homicide, and she's serving a life sentence plus 30 consecutive years. The murder took place on October 21, 2009, in the small community of St. Martins, Missouri. Prosecutors proved that Bustamante had spent days meticulously planning a murder, which included digging 2 shallow graves in a nearby wooded area. On the evening of the crime, Bustamante used her younger sister to lure 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton outside under the false pretense of playing together. Once Olton arrived, Bustamante led her into the woods where she violently choked her with her bare hands, slit her throat with a knife, and stabbed her repeatedly in the chest. After ensuring the child was dead, she buried her body in the pre-dug, well-concealed grave. Bustamante then returned home and chronicled the experience in her diary, writing, "I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the 'oh my god, I can't do this' feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kinda nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now, lol." Following an extensive 2-day search involving hundreds of volunteers, police focused on Bustamante due to her troubled history and internet posts, which listed cutting and killing people under her hobbies. She broke down during questioning and led detectives to the hidden gravesite. 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton was a young elementary school student who lived down the street from Bustamante. Charged as an adult, Bustamante initially faced first-degree murder, which carried a mandatory sentence of life without parole. In January 2012, she avoided a trial by pleading guilty to reduced charges of second-degree murder and armed criminal action. On February 8, 2012, a judge sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole for the murder charge, plus an additional 30 years for the armed criminal action charge. The judge ordered the sentences to run consecutively, one after the other, meaning she must serve both blocks of time. Bustamante later attempted to appeal her guilty plea, claiming her trial attorneys provided ineffective counsel by failing to wait for a U.S. Supreme Court ruling regarding juvenile lifers. Her appeals were entirely denied. In 2017, she also signed a $5 million civil settlement to resolve a wrongful death lawsuit filed by the victim's mother. Because of a Missouri jail reform law allowing certain juvenile offenders to apply for early release after 15 years, Bustamante was granted her first formal parole hearing on July 8, 2024. The Missouri Board of Parole denied her early release. Furthermore, due to the consecutive nature of her 30-year firearms charge, she would legally have to serve half of that secondary sentence even if paroled on the murder charge, making her actual physical release unlikely until around 2054. Her next parole review is scheduled for 2029. Erin Caffey. She is in prison for masterminding the brutal execution of her mother and two young brothers and the near fatal shooting of her father when she was just 16 years old. She orchestrated the mass murder because her parents ordered her to break up with her boyfriend. The massacre took place in the early morning hours of March 1, 2008, in Alba, Texas. Deeply angry that her very religious parents had forbidden her from dating 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson, Caffey spent a month plotting with him to annihilate her entire household so they could be together. On the night of the crime, she and an accomplice waited outside in a getaway car while Wilkinson and his friend Charles Wade broke into the home heavily armed. The two men systematically attacked the family in their beds, shooting and stabbing the victims with a gun and a samurai sword. After slaughtering the family, the killers robbed the house and set it on fire to incinerate the evidence. Caffey initially feigned being a victim who had been kidnapped by the attackers, but police quickly uncovered her text messages and call logs, which proved she was the mastermind behind the entire plot. Penny Caffey was 37 years old and Erin's mother. She was shot and nearly decapitated with the sword. Matthew Caffey was 13 years old and Erin's younger brother. He was shot in the face. Tyler Caffey was just 8. He was Erin's youngest brother. He was brutally stabbed to death. Terry Caffey was 41 years old and Erin's father. He was shot 5 times in the torso and face but miraculously survived. Despite his severe injuries, he managed to crawl out of the burning house and traverse 300 meters through the woods to a neighbor's home to get help. He later made national headlines for publicly forgiving his daughter. Charged as an adult with capital murder, Kathy avoided the death penalty due to her age. In January 2009, she struck a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder to evade a mandatory life without parole sentence. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 25 years. Official Texas Department of Criminal Justice records showed that Caffey is incarcerated at the Hobby Unit in Marlin, Texas. Because her life sentences run consecutively rather than concurrently, her technical parole eligibility date is set for March 1, 2038, meaning she must serve a mandatory baseline of 30 years and cannot physically be released until she is 46 years old. Her boyfriend Charlie Wilkinson and his accomplice Charles Wade both pleaded guilty and are serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. The getaway driver Bobby Johnson was sentenced to 40 years. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.